Good to go.
We're good to go. All right, thank you. Good morning, everybody. It's the October 7th meeting of our Agricultural Advisory Committee for Grey County. This time I'd like to call this meeting to order. We'll start off with the declaration of interest. Are there any at this time? All right, we'll continue. We have a report, an update on the status of the amendment number 11. I think, Scott, you're presenting that. Is that correct?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just from a procedural perspective, do we need the motion on the floor?
That would be great if you could get a motion simply to receive the report for information, but if you could get a mover and seconder, that would be great.
All right, this time I'd like to have a motion to receive the report. Can I have a mover and a seconder? Moved by Warden Hicks, seconded by Lori. Thank you. Go ahead, Scott.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Thanks for taking time to join us on this rainy Friday morning. So I've prepared just a little presentation here to go along with the report. So I'm just going to share my screen. I just want to confirm, can everyone see what's on the screen there now, the title slide? Perfect. Thank you very much. Okay, we'll get on with it then. So as members of the committee may recall, the county's been, working on official plan amendment number 11 for approximately the past year now. And so the county official plan was approved in June of 2019. And shortly after that, the province approved changes to their provincial policy statement in the year 2020. And some of those changes to the provincial policy statement have necessitated changes to the county official plan, including updating our growth numbers. Our growth numbers would be our population growth figures and our employment growth figures for the next 25 years. So in this case, to the year 2046. So the county initiated official plan amendment number 11 to update those growth numbers, as well as to address a number of what we were calling housekeeping matters and some mapping changes in that regard. We did hold an online public meeting back in February, and we've been undertaking ongoing consultation throughout 2022. We have had lots of great feedback from a number of members of the public, from agencies, from municipalities, and so some of that feedback has resulted in changes to official plan amendment number 11 since it was first proposed back in the early part of this year. I would also note that we had some excellent feedback from this very committee, specifically on the topic of preserving old barns and following up on the presentation from Mr. Wesley Wilson from Ontario Barn Preservation. And those changes have been incorporated into the amendment. And so the main thrust of our talk today is with respect to what we call on-farm diversified uses. And so this is a term that comes to us from the province. And in agricultural areas, there's three main types of permitted uses. One is agricultural uses. So those are all the normal farm uses in terms of raising of livestock and or crops. We have agriculture related uses. So those would be things like grain drying operations or abattoirs or those other uses that support farming and are required to be in the agricultural and rural areas. And then we have on-farm diversified uses, or OFDUs, as you'll see the acronym. And on-farm diversified uses are, if you like, businesses on the farm that may or may not be directly related to the farm, but provide a diversified source of income to farmers. And the province has given us a definition for on-farm diversified uses. And specifically, they note that they must be secondary to the principal agricultural use of the property. So basically, it needs to be on a farm. And they must also be limited in area. So we don't want much land lost to these on-farm diversified uses. They're supposed to be small on scale. The province has given us some examples of what might be considered an on-farm diversified use, everything from home occupation to a home industry to a bed and breakfast to some of those farms you'll see that have, say, corn mazes or a pick your own facility along with some agritourism elements. They've also provided some guidance as it relates to putting in things like ground-mounted solar facilities. So aside from the guidance in the provincial policy statement, they've also released a guideline specifically on this topic, which is called the Guideline on Permitted Uses in Prime Agricultural Areas. And this more specifically spells out the criteria for on-farm diversified uses. So our current county official plan, prior to official plan amendment number 11, already allows for OFDUs. And we allow for them across the agricultural designation, the special agricultural designation, and the rural designation. And similar to what we just saw in the provincial policy statement, it's things like home rural occupation. So this would be a business out of the house, so maybe an art studio or a professional office. Home industry, so this could be things like a welding or woodworking shop, small scale manufacturing, storage of boats in, say, a drive shed, veterinary clinics, kennels, you could have a small cafe, as I said, the agritourism uses. And so we do permit these across the county, and we have seen great uptake across the county for a whole wide variety of uses on the farm. The current county policies set size criteria for such uses, and as per the policies in the provincial policy statement, we are required to make them limited in scale. So we currently have different thresholds in our three main designations, our agricultural or special agricultural and our rural. And currently in the agricultural designation, if you have a farm that's 20 hectares or greater, you could have an on-farm diversified use that represents no more than either the 2% of the total size of the property or a maximum combined area of 8,000 square meters, and it's the lesser of the two. And so when I say a maximum combined area of 8,000 square meters, this is for the entirety of the use. That's not a building size. So this would include everything from parking to any outdoor storage or landscaped area, as well as the building. And so the building can only be a fraction of that. If you're on less than a 20 hectare property currently in the agricultural designation, you're only eligible for in-home uses and or bed and breakfast. We have slightly different rules in the special agricultural designation because these are primarily our apple and grape lands, and they're much smaller farm sizes. So if you're 10 hectares or greater of agriculturally productive area, then you can have similar sizes to what was outlined in the agricultural designation, again, relative to the total size of the farm. And currently our rural designation is our most permissive in that you can have on-farm diversified uses on 20 hectares or greater, or you can have a much smaller on-farm diversified use on farms that are less than 20 hectares. And I should note that in the current county official plan policy, we have these size restrictions and they're relative to the size of the farm, but we don't have any test in the plan currently for determining who is a farmer in this regard or what is a bona fide farmer, and that'll come up later in the presentation. And so I wanted to share with you some examples that are directly from the province's guideline of how you might see these policies implemented. And so what they've done is they've outlined what it looks like on a small, a medium, and a large scale farm. So for the purposes of this example, we have a small scale farm. It's about 15 hectares in size. They're looking at reusing an existing barn for an antique shop. So in this case, we don't calculate the area of the house or the rest of the farm as part of the on-farm use. We look at what the use is. So in this case, they didn't need a separate laneway. They're using the existing farm laneway, so we don't have to include any of that square meterage. They are reusing an existing barn, so they get a bit of a discount on their total size because they're reusing the building. They have parking for 4 cars, and then we look at the total area of the on-farm diversified use. And so that would be well within sort of the 2% of the total size of the farm in this case. With respect to a medium-sized farm, in this case, they proposed a cafe with a commercial kitchen, as well as 3 overnight farm cabins and a little playground in the back. And so what you'll see on this example is they do have a separate laneway. So we do need to factor that into the calculation. In this case, it's a bigger operation. So they have parking for 20 cars. We calculate the size of the buildings in terms of both the cafe and the bakery and the kitchen, as well as the 3 cabins individually. We calculate the size of the farm market, the playground, and then the landscaped area that's specific to the on-farm diversified use and that's not really a part of the farm. In this case, again, you have a larger size on-farm diversified use, but again, within the total size permissions of the farm. And I should note that on some properties we have agricultural uses, agricultural related uses, and on-farm diversified. So it's not mutually exclusive. One farm can have all three in that regard. With respect to what it might look like on a larger farm, in this case, we have a proposed fabrication plant with some outdoor storage area, parking, and truck access. And this would be similar to some of the on-farm diversified uses that we see in some of the southern parts of our county, like in Grey Highlands and Southgate, where we have some of these on-farm shops. They are looking at an office in the new building. They're using the existing farm laneway, but then they're looking at a new plant, a new fabrication plant at the size of 1,500 square meters. They've got parking for cars as well as truck access. And then they've got outdoor storage area in behind the shop area, as well as some landscaping to help buffer the use. In this case, again, we have a larger use, but relative to the total size of the farm, which is 50 hectares, the province has determined this is an appropriate size for this type of use. So with that as background, we wanted to take you through just what the on-farm diversified use changes are in Official Plan Amendment number 11. And I'm going to show you a table here in just a second that outlines the sizes. But essentially, the changes in Official Plan Amendment would allow for on-farm diversified uses on slightly smaller farms in both the agricultural and special agricultural designations. It was already allowed on a variety of farm sizes in the rural designation, so there's not really much changes there. We've recognized that some of these on-farm diversified uses can come with noise impacts, traffic impacts, or servicing requirements. And so in this case, we've simply recognized in the plan that in order to apply for one of these uses, in some cases, you might need a noise study, or you might need a traffic study or a servicing study in that regard. It's not for all on-farm diversified uses, but in some it might be appropriate. We've removed campgrounds as a permitted use as an on-farm diversified use in this regard in the agricultural and special agricultural designations. They are still permitted in rural. I would say about 6 or 8 years ago, one of the biggest amount of inquiries we had for on-farm diversified uses is, can I host weddings on my farm? Can I have a wedding barn? And as you can imagine, that was one of those ones that, you know, you're probably into looking at a noise study and a traffic study and a servicing, because you can picture a noisy wedding every Saturday night of the summer being quite disruptive to the neighbors. And as one local planner says, you know, you don't want to hear the chicken dance every Saturday night at midnight if you're a neighbor. It gets old pretty quick. So we've since seen much less interest in these wedding barns, but definitely during the pandemic and in the height of the pandemic, we were getting multiple calls a week from people wanting to build campgrounds and glamping operations across the countryside. And in most cases, these simply weren't limited in size or area in terms of the proposal. Oh, you know, we just want an on-farm site with 80 campsites and everything else. And well, that doesn't really fit within the area being proposed. So we've removed that in this case. And so the next test we've added is the requirement for farmers or for operators to be a bona fide farmer prior to getting an on-farm diversified use. And there's no easy way to define a bona fide farmer. And I'm sure that members of the committee today will have lots of opinions on this. But we needed something that could be tested. And really the only test we could come up with was, do they have a farm business registration number? We use that in other sections of the plan, but we hadn't previously required that for on-farm diversified uses. And I know there are criticisms of this test because it's not a very high bar to meet in terms of the level of farm income you need to be to get a farm business registration number. And I would also stress that it's a point in time. So, you know, somebody could apply for this on-farm diversified use. Let's say they wanted a small scale cidery on their farm. They show that they have their farm business registration number, but then say 2 years later, they decide to sell the farm. There's no requirement for that future buyer to sort of re-demonstrate that they're also a farmer. And in planning in general, the permissions that are granted to the land. They're not granted to the landowner because the landowner can change at any time. So we plan for the land, not necessarily the landowners. And then the final change that we proposed in official plan amendment number 11 stems from direction that we got from the Agricultural Advisory Committee about the need to preserve old barns and old farm buildings across the county. So in this case, what happens, similar to the provincial guideline, is if you're reusing an old building or a current building, you get a bit of a discount on your building size criteria versus if you're building a brand new one. And again, this is really to incent reusing those old buildings if they're not used for livestock or other farm purposes anymore. So what do the changes look like from a size perspective? So in the agricultural designation, you can now have an on-farm diversified use if you have a farm business registration number on a farm that's 10 hectares in size or greater. You're still limited to relative to the size of the farm. So if you come in with a 10-hectare property, you're going to get a very small on-farm diversified use. If you come in with a 50-hectare farm property, you're going to get a slightly larger one. So the main change affects the agricultural designation here because we already allowed for on-farm diversified uses on farms slightly over 10 hectares in the special agricultural designation and a wide variety of sizes in the rural designation. The other slight change here is you see the test in the right-hand column, the lesser of, it's still 2% of the total size of the property, but we've increased the maximum combined area from 8,000 square meters to 10,000 square meters or a hectare in that regard. And again, that's in accordance with the province's guideline. I should state that although we allow for an on-farm diversified use on a 10-hectare property in the agricultural designation, we don't allow for the creation of a 10-hectare property or a 20-hectare property in the agricultural designation. This only would apply to existing lots in that regard. So a farmer or a landowner can't come in and apply for a 10-hectare severance in the agricultural designation for the purpose of getting an on-farm diversified use. But if they found an existing 10-hectare property and if they had a farm business registration number, then they might be able to get an on-farm diversified use. And so what does it look like when we compare the old and the new? And so this is specific to the agricultural designation, and the top table that you see there is the old policies, and the bottom table would be the new policies if they get passed by county council in official plan amendment number 11. So what you can see on the lower end of the spectrum, yeah, there is a slight difference in the 10-hectare range because you would now be eligible for an out of the house on-farm diversified use in that regard. You'd be limited in size to 2,000 square meters of the total size of the on-farm diversified use. So that would include everything from, the driveway to the parking to the outdoor storage. And then you'd have a limited building size of up to 400 square meters. What you can see in the 20-hectare range, the 30-hectare range, the 40-hectare range, no change whatsoever, exactly the same as the existing policies. In the 50-hectare range, you do get a slightly larger use, both in terms of the total size of the on-farm diversified use and the total size of the building. But that is the cap. You can't go any more than 10,000 square meters for the total size or 2,000 square meters for the building. I will say we've been dealing with these policies for a number of years now. The current policies allow for up to a 1,600 square meter building. I will say that's very, very rare. Although they allow for that, we don't see many farmers building to that maximum. That's by far the anomaly and not the rule in that regard on larger farms. Oops, sorry. So why did we do this? What's the rationale behind all this? So the rationale behind requiring the farm business registration number is really to try to better comply with the provincial policy to ensure that it is secondary to the agricultural use of the property. Again, it is a point in time requirement, and as people on this committee know, municipalities don't have the ability to force somebody to farm or force somebody to continue farming. Anybody can buy a farm property at any time. They can choose whether or not they want to farm it, or they can choose whether or not they want to lease out the lands or for all intents and purposes, do nothing with the lands. And we permit farming across the county and we encourage it, and we try to work with farmers in the farm community, but we can't force farming, if you will. I would also note that there is the criteria in the provincial policy statement that they have to be secondary to the agricultural use of the property. That's secondary in terms of, you need to have the farm, you need to be farming, but it's not a measure of income. So in some cases, we've had questions from the public in the past to say, hey, listen, I'm guessing that, that particular farm generates more money from the on-farm business than they do from the farming themselves. And it could very well be in some of those cases, but quite frankly, that's none of our business. And that's none of our concern as it applies to allowing for this diversified source of income. You know, as people on the committee will know, many farm families have at least one member of the family that's working off the farm and generating a diversified income in that source. So these policies simply allow for hopefully that income to be earned on the land, and maybe some of the profits from that income can be invested back into making improvements in the farm and in the land in that regard. We are, again, allowing for the discounted size of existing buildings in order to promote the adaptive reuse of the farm buildings. We are recognizing the smaller farm sizes, and this came about as a result of a request from a farmer and his planning consultant that said, you know, he's had people in his community that were looking to buy a 15-hectare farm and acknowledge the fact that 15 hectares on its own wouldn't be a viable farm parcel. But if they could have that secondary source of income on the farm, then that makes it viable. And in their opinion, the risk of these existing 15-hectare farms or 12-hectare farms or 19-hectare farms is that they could be attractive to someone looking to buy it just for the purposes of having a rural estate or an agricultural estate and not farming. So their rationale was that by allowing for the secondary source of income and allowing for it only where they prove that they are a farmer, then there's less chance that these lands will be bought up by non-farmers. Obviously, we have no way of guaranteeing that, but that was their rationale. And then finally, the rationale for requiring the studies. It's something we've been doing anyway, so we have been requiring noise, servicing, or traffic studies on certain applications, but we just wanted to codify that in the policy in that regard. And so with respect to some of the other policy considerations we need to keep in mind here, one is that the county official plan, both in its current form and post official plan amendment number 11, if that's passed, sets the broad policy. And this sets sort of the bar across the county. But municipalities then have the ability to go in and tailor the policies to their own needs, and they can be more restrictive. So right now we have our current county policy across the county, and some municipalities have very similar policies. Other municipalities like Grey Highlands, for example, have a more restrictive policy. And so they only allow for smaller on-farm diversified uses. And so that's well within the realm of municipal ability in that regard. In the current county official plan, we also require tests prior to getting these on-farm diversified uses. So we do need to see a demonstration that you are compatible with the surrounding farms or houses nearby. We do need to see that whatever you're proposing can be sustained by local servicing levels. So, you know, for 99% of rural Ontario, that would be sustained by wells and septic systems. And also that it's appropriate for local infrastructure levels. So if we think about the impact on our rural roads in that regard, we need to see that all building code requirements can be met. And sometimes that is a challenge when you're adapting, say, a 100-year-old bank barn and trying to use it for a new use. Again, we need to see that the scale is secondary to the size of the farm. We need to see that you can incorporate things like on-site parking where it's needed. And we also need to see that if you are proposing an industrial use, that you comply with the ministry's guidelines to separate industrial uses from nearby dwellings. And so this isn't just for on-farm diversified uses. It can apply to things like a grain drying operation too, where you might have noise requirements throughout the evening during certain times of the year. Municipalities also have the ability to apply site plan control to such on-farm diversified uses. And for those that might not be as familiar with site plan control, basically you have your zoning, and your zoning would tell you that you can have this use, and it would also tell you how far you have to be set back from your lot line and from the road and everything else. But the site plan control takes it to another level. So that would take it to looking at exactly where on the property this use is sited. It would get into things like what types of fencing or landscaping are required to buffer it from neighbors or other such things. What does the parking look like? The aesthetics of the overall on-farm diversified use. Again, just to ensure that compatibility. We also will be looking at infrastructure levels through the technical studies. And in some cases, for some of the more industrial on-farm diversified uses, municipalities can choose to collect development charges, which then go back into helping ensure the infrastructure like the rural roads are suitably funded and paid for in that regard. We have heard concerns with respect to the county's policies about workplace health and safety and enforcement of workplace health and safety. And while we don't minimize those concerns in any sense, it's not something that we can consider through the planning process. At the end of the day, if somebody's operating their farm or their on-farm business, they're required to apply to all provincial legislation and guidelines. And there's specific ministry enforcement of that, but that enforcement isn't at the county or municipal level. We do find that on-farm diversified uses over the years have provided a benefit to farmers, and we have seen in parts of the county whereby people have bought marginal farmland. They've been able to build the on-farm diversified use and invest some of that money back into the farm. So that could be things like improving buildings or improving fencing. It could be other things like tile drainage and taking slightly more marginal land and making it a little bit more productive. We've also seen agritourism across the county, and certainly Philly Markowitz could speak to this way better than I can, but there's so many great examples throughout the county where we have working farms that also have something to offer to the public, whether it be a pick your own or whether it be a winery or a cidery or a corn maze, sorry, lots of neat examples there. So there is a benefit to both the farmers and also trying to make that connection between non-farmers and where our food comes from. So with all that, county staff believe that the policies are compliant with the provincial policies and the Planning Act and the province's guidelines. They're not in conflict with the Niagara Escarpment Plan, and they maintain the goals and objectives of the county plan. So the recommendation in the report is that the report be received as per the motion, and then certainly happy to take any questions. But I wonder, and I'll stop sharing my screen here, through you, Mr. Chair, if it might be appropriate to hear from our deputation first and hear their point of view and their comments, and then maybe we could open it up to questions either of the deputation or of county staff, if that works for the committee.
Yeah, that seems to be okay with me. Yeah, sure.
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Councillor McQueen.
Just for procedure, does there need to be a motion to defer or to do whatever to allow that? Is that through the Tara or anybody else? Do we need a motion to allow that to be received just procedurally?
All right, can I have a motion towards that? Mover and seconder, please.
Well, I'll certainly move that.
Moved by Councillor McQueen and seconded by Lori. Thank you. All right, would like to comment.
All in favor?
Oh, sorry, all in favor, yes. We're all in favor, all right. Please proceed. Who wanted to comment on that?
Through you, Mr. Chair. If I might interject, I believe Councillor McQueen's comments were with respect to reordering the agenda a little bit so that we can now hear from the delegations and their presentation before we return to considering the motion that's on the floor to receive staff's report for information. And so with the motion that has just been carried, if it pleases the chair, we will now move on to hear from the delegations.
That sounds like a good plan. So let's hear from the OFA delegation. Who would like to present first?
I'll go first, Mr. Chair. So thank you, everybody, for having us here today. So I'm gonna be presenting alongside my colleague Diane Booker, president of the Gray Federation of Agriculture. My name is Emily Sousa. I am the land use policy analyst at the OFA. I am a candidate member of the Ontario Professional Planners Institute and have been working on our policy positions regarding on-farm diversified uses over the last few months. So I'm going to speak quickly and then pass it over to Diane. Sarah, could you change the slide, please? Thank you. So with respect to the presentation that was just given to us by county staff, I will say that it is very much in line with the OFA's position on-farm diversified uses. And there are a few specific points from our perspective that I would like to highlight. So first and foremost is that we acknowledge and recognize and encourage municipalities to know that on-farm diversified uses are absolutely critical for agricultural viability, succession planning, and rural economic development. There are a number of benefits to be had there, and we encourage municipalities to view these. Secondly, we support on-farm diversified uses on the contingency that they meet all 5 criteria that are outlined in the OMAFRA guidelines on permitted uses in Ontario's prime agricultural areas. And that is the guidance document that Scott previously referred to and the one that's showcased on the screen. And so specifically, we have a number of considerations there. So we want on-farm diversified uses to meet all 5 of these criteria, which is number 1, it's located on the farm. Number 2, it is secondary to the principal agricultural use of the property. And just to clarify, that is in terms of land area only. We do not have a perspective on whether or not it generates more income than the farm operation. Number 3, that it is limited in area. So with respect to the OMAFRA guideline, and that is that it is a maximum of 2% of the farmland to a maximum of 1 hectare. Number 4, that it includes but is not limited to home occupations, home industries, agritourism, and value-added uses. And number 5, it is compatible with and does not hinder surrounding agricultural operations. We also would like municipalities to regulate on-farm diversified uses on active farm operations and not just operation or parcels that are zoned for agricultural uses. And we recognize this is trickier to do, but we still encourage municipalities to use innovative policies and procedures that they have available to them to ensure this. We would like to see on-farm diversified uses permitted on both prime and rural lands, and as well as to adopt as of right permissions for on-farm diversified uses within your zoning bylaw and zoning and official plan based on appropriate size and scale to outline these expectations to farmers as to what would be an appropriate size and scale and to streamline their applications in this regard. A few more things. So we would encourage municipalities to scale back application fees, simplify requirements, and streamline the process where feasible for farmers. And there are a different variety of ways that this can occur. An example might be using a specific site plan control process for on-farm diversified uses, where those on-farm diversified uses would be permitted as of right within your official plan and zoning bylaw, just requiring a farmer to undergo site plan control. And of course, that site plan process should be applied with a rural lens. For instance, we have members that have required paving of their parking lots through the site plan process, which obviously does not work well for rehabilitating that land should the on-farm diversified use cease in the future. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, maybe we can go back. Yeah, so these are just the 5 criteria that I had spoken about before. And I will now pass it on to Diane to carry it away from the Grey Federation's perspective.
Thanks, Emily. So you can go to the next slide, please. So Grey Federation just is very much encouraging that there needs to be a better way to confirm that the applicants are active farming. We know that the FBR is that you only need $7,000 worth of farm income, and that's very easy to get. So we just encourage that you try to make a better way to confirm the applicants are the active farmers. And then we need to ensure that the on-farm diversified uses continue to be secondary to the principal use, and that it doesn't overtake the rest of the agricultural use of that property. And then the implications of allowing on-farm diversification uses on lot areas. When you get to a smaller lot area, then it's very hard to make the rest of that still be agricultural land and that it stay that way. And then how do you monitor that a lot isn't severed for just the on-farm diversifications? And if somebody were to apply 5 years after that lot is severed, is it denied then, or are they accepted? So thank you for listening to Emily and I, and hopefully this makes your decision a little easier today for on the motion.
All right, thank you, Diane. Thank you, Emily. Were there any other presentations from OFA at this time? That was it. Okay. Well, let's open up the floor to any questions or comments on both presentations. Maybe we'll start with the presentation by Mr. Taylor. Any questions for Mr. Taylor at this time? Comments about his presentation? Go ahead, Councillor McQueen.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And thanks, Scott, for the presentation. Just a little bit more on the conversation around secondary to agricultural operations. You know, some might look at that as that the revenue that is generated on that farm, is it the intent of it being secondary? This is a lot of the questions that I have heard and others with regards to the whole part. Is it actually secondary to the farm operation? And I know it's hard to decipher that, but you know, a lot of comments have been made more recently because it becomes industrializing our rural or agricultural lands and that sort of thing. I'm just trying to seek that part of secondary to the agricultural operations. I understand the 2% of the land mass for sure, and but it just, I guess, in the sense of certainly I think we would all agree that the price of farms and the price of farms today have got to the point is it's pretty hard to purchase that farm in a business plan without a large source of income in the plan over a period of time to support the purchasing of that farm, not only to say about the equipment and the input costs and a large number of aspects to farming itself and the capital costs as well. So what a lot of people have said is it's sort of like, while the farming is maybe secondary to the commercial business in the sense of but certainly I think, Scott, you indicated it as well that you know, I think there was a statistics study even up to 10 years ago that farm receipts up to $250,000 had off-farm income, basically supporting that farm was critical in the sense of having off-farm income to make that farm operation is to what it is. And certainly farmers have to have a place to live and raise a family. So I guess in the sense, I think a lot of people are just questioning the secondary to the agriculture. And I know, Scott, you've heard a lot of these comments. We've all heard these comments. And I just wondered if there's any way we can dive down into that a little bit more, because you've heard the comments as well. And I just wonder, Mr. Chair, we have a little bit more discussion on that, and just in the sense of an open discussion on how we look at that. And again, certainly to support a farm and the price of farms today, it's there, you know, the operation is needing a lot of revenue to support that for sure. So I'll leave it at that, Mr. Chair, and just look for other comments and maybe from Scott as well.
Thank you, Councillor McQueen. Would you like to comment on that right now, Scott, or?
Sure, through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your comments, Deputy Warden McQueen. Some good points raised for sure. The one thing I guess to keep in mind when we're talking about this secondary to the principal use of the farm is in a number of cases, the on-farm diversified uses are very related to the farm. Not in all cases, but you know, if I give you an example of somebody opening up an on-farm winery or cidery. So there's no question about it. The growing of apples, the growing of grapes, that's an agricultural use. You don't need to talk to the county or the municipality if you want to grow apples or grapes. You just, you know, start growing, so to speak. So then when you get into the processing of those, say cold storage of the apples or pressing of the grapes, that's when, and processing it into wine, that's when you're getting into an agricultural related use. And so the way the province sets those is there's absolutely no limitation on the size and the scale. You do still have to make sure that you can service it appropriately, but basically you can have those agricultural related uses to the size that the farm will support. And so then say on-farm, if you have the winery or the cidery room and you have a little winery or cidery and you have a little tasting room or maybe a small cafe, that's where you'd get into that part being the on-farm diversified use. So if we consider that full suite of uses from the growing of the grapes to the pressing and the processing to the tasting room / maybe, you're selling some t-shirts with your branded winery or whatever else, that collectively is your farm income. And no doubt, hopefully you're making money from the wine, hopefully you're making money from the cheese trays or the shirts or whatever else, but we can't really break that up in the same way that we could for others. And so it's tough when we start looking at maybe applying different sets of rules for different on-farm businesses. If we picture the on-farm shops that we see in largely in the south of our county, some of those are if you like, distinct businesses from the farm. They're permitted today, but in terms of measuring farm gate receipts versus the income generated from the on-farm shop, as I said before, it's simply none of our business. And while I can respect the concern from neighbors or concern from farmers with respect to is this secondary? Does it feel secondary? Really, the test for secondary for us has to come down to, is it limited in size? And are you actually farming the rest of the property? Because, quite frankly, we want all farmers to make money through legal means. And so if they're making money through crops and livestock, fantastic. If they're making money through an agricultural related use, like a grain drying operation, fantastic. And if they're making money through an on-farm diversified use, whether it be, corn mazes or on-farm industry, again, fantastic. We want to make sure that what we're doing is not taking much land out of production, and we want to make sure that it's compatible and safe to neighbors and other farms. But unfortunately, we just can't get into sort of that debate over income and being secondary to the farm in that sense. And the one further thing I'll say is, again, similar on the off-farm income. The farm I grew up on, my dad had a job off the farm and my mom was the farmer. And no disrespect to my mom's farming skills, if you will, but we needed that off-farm income to make a go of it. And certainly there's a lot of farm families that are in a similar boat. And so this, again, just allows for more flexibility on the farm and hopefully making the entire lands viable through the suite of uses permitted.
Thank you, Scott. Brenda, I see you have your hand up. Please go ahead.
All right. My first point that I want to make is that farm sizes smaller than 20 hectares can be viable farms. There are many direct sales type farms, market gardens or whatnot, where 1 acre is actually highly productive and can support a farm. So I will also say that there are many kinds of agriculture that are not viable on something other 20 acres. So I just want to, as we know with apples or sort of more high value crops. So I just want to make a note that I don't think it's necessarily size. We shouldn't be limiting ourselves to not recognizing those as properly active farms if they are smaller amounts. And also in terms of bringing new farmers into the area, the smaller sizes of farms with the permission of having off-dues is very important, because as everyone has mentioned, everyone needs this non-growing of a plant or an animal income to be able to actually survive and have viability over the long term. So I think that's accepted. I think if you look at StatsCan, I can't remember, I'm going to assume if OFA or Laura, you have the numbers, but I think it's like 80% of farmers across all of Canada have full-time off-farm income to support their farm. So I don't think we should, I feel like this discussion over like primary, secondary to the farm in terms of income, like unless we start looking at people's tax returns, we can't really go along with that. So I completely understand OMAFRA's stance of the 2% of the 1 hectare and all of those numbers. They totally make sense. I think that perhaps the problem here is not so much that people are objecting to farm stores or commercial kitchens. My impression is this has more to do with industrial use. And this is where Perhaps there needs to be a bit more creative in not grouping all of on-farm diversified uses as like the same thing. You know, there are commercial kitchens and farm stores and corn mazes, and there's also a lot of manufacturing. And perhaps one of the things that needs to be considered is to actually start putting these two in different boats, because they're not the same thing, and they do definitely have different levels of risk to neighbors and everything else. So perhaps that is one of the creative things that planning should consider, that there actually needs to be a distinction between the different kinds of on-farm diversified use. Third, permitting these on-farm diversified uses. I know you're saying that it's attached to the actual piece of land. Again, is there any creativity at the municipal level where we could say it is actually tied to the owner, where if a property does get sold and change hands, there does have to be a process for the new owner to be allowed to continue with that on-farm diversified use, which then follows all the same rules. So I think that perhaps that would address some of these ideas of like severing and then being able to do whatever you want, and it's just being carried on for the future. I think if perhaps it is attached to the owner as opposed to the actual property, that would address some of these future concerns. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Brenda. Some good points raised there. I see Lori, you have your hand up as well. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, everyone. I have collected a bunch of comments from a variety of farmers, and if I may, I would like to read what I have pulled together. It's about 3 pages, but I will talk quickly and succinctly. So if I may, Chair, can I go ahead?
Please go ahead. I think the topic warrants any input at this time, so go ahead.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you for the presentations thus far. I would like to thank Grey County Council for directing the County Planning Department to seek further public consultation about sections of OPA Amendment 11. We would urge the Planning Department to go even further, as per this brief letter that I will read from the Grey County Beef Farmers Association. In accordance with their motion on Monday, October 3rd, 2022, the GCBFA is preparing to address Grey County Council, Grey County Planner, and the Grey County Agricultural Committee to express their concerns for Amendment 11. Although not arguing a position with the amendment at this time, the GCBFA would echo concerns from others in the community talking about the potential to industrialize rural and agricultural land in the whole of Grey County, including Grey Highlands. Before Council decides to move forward on the suggested official plan Amendment 11, GCBFA is requesting further consultation be conducted with other commodity and agricultural groups in Grey County, allowing all to fully understand and address the impact created by this amendment. And I thank GCBFA for forwarding that to me. I would like to thank and commend Planner Taylor and the Planning Department for their efforts on Amendment 11. It has taken significant work, so the last thing you probably want to consider is further delays. But these amendments will impact all of the county, and the consequences need to be clearly understood before a final decision is rendered. I would like to point out that the change detailed in item number 90 to allow OFDUs on smaller parcels was based on a request, as it says in the rationale, from farmers with the support of a planning consultant. As earlier comments from the Planning Department stated, that suggestion came from a representative, and farmers have pointed out to me that he lives in Wellesley, Ontario. Based on what I have heard from local farmers, I would say that most are not in agreement with this suggested change. Amendment 11 is to come back to County Council on October 13th, the last time they sit before the election. Perhaps, as Deputy Warden McQueen had suggested at an earlier meeting, items number 15, 17, 18, 90, 91, 92 should be pulled from Amendment 11. The other items could be approved, and then the OFDU related amendments can be given the due diligence that they deserve and ensure that the core principles of the PPS, protection, compatibility, and appropriateness are met. If it is not possible to deal with the OFDU related sections separately on October 13th, we do hope that the current council will decide to defer this decision on OPA 11 until the new council is established. I would also like to call attention to the decision made on Wednesday afternoon at the Grey Highlands Council meeting. Importantly, Council unanimously denied an official plan amendment proposal that was seeking to revise the definition of small scale to permit OFDUs on lots between 10 and 20 hectares within the rural designation. So similar to what we're looking at today. As you know, I work at Grey Ag Services. Our office strives for neutrality on all issues such as these. So today I will simply act as a conduit for the voices of others who feel that they have not been given the opportunity to speak to this issue, or if they have not been listened to. We hope that these comments that I share today will be respected, heard, and considered before final decisions are made by County Council. I should add, I do live in rural Grey Highlands. My husband farms, and on my 12-minute drive to work this week in one small portion of Grey County, I drive past 6 relatively new OFDUs, either already built or in progress. OFDUs, as most people feel they were originally intended, enabled an established farmer needing to generate additional income to start an on-farm business. And most of the businesses were ag-related and supported the local ag community, like the shop that did some welding or fixed your tractor, and that system works really well. OFA has reiterated today that with the clause, but not limited to, an OFDU can be almost anything, and that is what we are experiencing. Many of the new C4s are industrial manufacturing facilities, and there are concerns of whether the C4 is truly secondary to the ag operation. But as it has been clarified today, we now know that it only needs to be secondary spatially and temporally. Every issue has two sides. On the positive side, these OFDUs that are being established have created jobs, and the merits of local manufacturing have never been more evident than during COVID. The price of farms escalated over the past few years due to many factors, yes, but in part, that increase was due to the demand for land to house OFDUs. That spike in farm prices ended up being a wonderful retirement package for retiring farmers. However, on the flip side, this escalation in farm real estate prices also created bidding wars between existing Grey County farmers and those that wanted to build the OFDU. The end result was that only a few could afford the farms, so plans for expansion and succession were dashed. Some farmers have expressed that they feel like they're being squeezed out. Some Southgate farmers that I spoke to were in a different mindset regarding OFDUs versus many Grey Highland farmers. Southgate had their onslaught of C4 several years ago, so they seemed to be more accepting of it. But it was noted that there were growing pains to get to where they are today, and some question where they will be over the next decade. Many of the C4s are servicing farm operations. They are pleased with how the farms have been cleaned up, and they are viewed as much more productive now than they ever were. It was noted, however, that the roads are in disrepair. Many of the roads across Grey County were not constructed to endure the amount or type of additional traffic that they are experiencing from the more industrial OFDUs. Grey Highlands, perhaps more than any other municipality at this moment, is experiencing a tsunami of C4s. Change is hard, but when listening to the farmers, I believe that their concerns are broader than just a knee-jerk reaction to change. One of the guidelines for OFDUs that OFA listed for us earlier was, shall be compatible with and shall not hinder surrounding. Planning policies should ensure that farm businesses, OFDUs, do not change the rural character of the area. I think the nature of Grey Highlands and perhaps other areas are quite different than Southgate. These other areas attract more tourism. Perhaps the more industrial C4s are less compatible with picturesque rural landscapes. Some of the concerns shared around individual and cumulative impacts of more industrial OFDUs include road issues, noise concerns. It was great to hear that there will be some checks and balances in there, but if the density of the OFDUs increase, it is anticipated that so will the cumulative impact of these noise concerns. There are concerns over potential risk to our environment, air pollution, water contamination, possible chemical spills, and in turn, there are safety concerns. I know Scott already addressed this, but safety concerns are an issue. It was highlighted by an explosion on Grey Road 12 a couple years ago at an industry that refurbishes propane tanks. Volunteer firefighters reported that they had no idea what type of fire they were fighting because they were not informed as to the nature of the industrial process. In the on-farm business policy review written by Grey County, it reports on page 26 that the large-scale on-farm businesses that were industrial in nature were typically those regarded as having a negative impact on the neighboring environments. Farmers stated that these potential negative impacts should be monitored instead of relying on a complaint-based system. There is a lot of passion and energy in any conversation about the more industrial in nature OFDUs. Some feel that these industries that have nothing to do with agriculture are better suited in an industrial park. The increase in C4 applications is changing the rural fabric across the county. Allowing them on smaller acreages in addition to larger farms will be a further blow to the healthy, diverse agricultural sector. As OFA has said, it is feared that Amendment 11 will open the gates to the severance of larger rural farms into smaller parcels. This could increase the density and proliferation of these industries, create industrial hubs in our countryside, and exacerbate certain current issues. If the demand for land for OFDUs drove up the price for larger farms, it is anticipated that prices for smaller farms will escalate as well, making them even more unattainable for new farmers starting out. Those smaller acreages are very farmable, as Brenda said, and as Amy has told me as well, to those that have the intent of starting something like a market garden. To wrap this up, there is conflict already occurring with the existing proliferation of OFDUs. Why exacerbate the problem further by creating more opportunity for the industrialization of our rural landscape? I will give the farmers the last word. Farmers produce food, not auto parts. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Lori. Lots of good points and information there to digest. Leonard Scott Taylor, would you like to comment on Lori or anything else? Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to thank both Lori and Brenda for their comments, and I wonder if I might just respond to a few of those things. It came up in the chat too, and I realize people watching online can't see this, but there was a question in the chat about whether or not on-farm diversified uses could be severed in the future, and sort of if I can distill it, is there a chance that someone gets this on-farm business and then simply severs it off? And so I'll be 100% clear that in OPA 11, Official Plan Amendment number 11, there's no change to our severance policies. And furthermore, in both the provincial policy and the Grey County policy and our municipal policies, there's no ability to sever an on-farm diversified use in the agricultural designation or the special agricultural designation. So if a farmer gets one of these on-farm diversified uses, whether they're on a 10-hectare property or a 40-hectare property, the provincial rules, the county rules, the local rules simply don't allow for these severances in the prime agricultural areas anymore. So I just wanted to be completely clear on that. Certainly like to thank Brenda for her comments with respect to farm sizes and viability, and yeah, there's a variety of farm operations, and you know, maybe I shouldn't have been so focused on the size being the indicator of the viability in that regard. With respect to some of Lori's comments that she shared from various people. Thank you very much, Lori, for all the work you do at Grey Ag Services, including, you know, helping collect input and feeding that back to staff at the county and this committee. It's so greatly appreciated. With respect to some of the comments about on-farm industry, you know, maybe just as a bit of a history here. It used to be that from the year 2000 to the year 2012 in the county, you could get an on-farm diversified use in terms of an on-farm shop if you could demonstrate that it somehow related back to farmers or farming in the area. So if you had an on-farm shop that was doing some welding and fixing farm machinery, then yep, that's great. That's clearly related to farming. So that would be permitted. Or, you know, if you had a small scale manufacturing operation that was, you know, manufacturing gates or water troughs, yep, we can see that relation. The problem with that policy was it got down to sort of an enforcement nightmare. So, you know, similar to the challenges we would have with respect to the on-farm or the farm business registration number, is that, you know, farmer A came in and said, hey, listen, I want to build a welding shop. I'm going to fix gates. I'm going to do some machinery repair. You know, they get their permissions, and their permissions would essentially say, you can have a welding shop on the property, or you can do repair or whatever else. Farmer A sells that property 2 years later to farmer B. You know, farmer B starts doing something else in that welding shop. And there was no way, and maybe even no desire, to practically enforce that if the land use impacts weren't changing. So if we're not taking any more land out of agriculture, and farmer B isn't doing anything that's more impactful from a noise or emissions perspective, you know, is it really any of the government's business what he or she is manufacturing in there, other than from a health and safety perspective. And people like the fire department should know what they're getting into if they're responding to a concern there. And so the other element there was, so, even if a municipality tried to enforce it, are you going to come and shut Farmer B down because they're not manufacturing exactly what Farmer A said they would? So the province changed their rules in about 2014, and that was followed up by their guidelines. And that's when the county also relaxed our rules a little bit in that regard, because it definitely seemed good on paper that we would try to make all this on-farm industry directly related to agriculture and farming, but it was really an on-paper test only. There was no practical way of enforcing it. And I think to some of the comments from Lori and maybe to a lesser extent from Brenda, I agree with you 100% that on-farm diversified uses can't be all lumped into one basket, so to speak. There's a huge difference between somebody offering a pumpkin patch and a corn maze in the fall and that type of thing versus an on-farm industry that's operating year round. And so there are differences right now in how we would process those applications and the types of things we would need at the municipal or county level before a farmer would be permitted to build one of those. And so in the on-farm industry, that's where you're more likely to require the noise or the servicing or the traffic tests studies. I mean, not in all regards, but in some cases, versus for some of the smaller agritourism, then simply put, you're most likely not going to require any of that. And so I think our greatest tool here from a municipal perspective is to look at the site plan considerations related to that. And similar to what Emily was mentioned, if we can come up with catered site plan processes that address some of these concerns, whether it be traffic or noise or separation distance, then that's the primary tool I think we have to address. Some of the other comments that Lori raised with respect to cumulative impact, that's a tough one. I wish I had a silver bullet there to say, yep, here's how we deal with that. Simply put, we only ever deal with one operation at a time. So if Farmer A is coming forward for an application and they want to do X on their property, then we would put them through the application process. They would be required to meet any of the technical studies. But if they get their approval, they're approved. And then if 2 concessions over, Farmer B wants to do something a year later, again, they're tested against those same policies. So there's no easy way to say, to the 4th person on, concession 2 that, hey, listen, because 3 people came before you, you're held to a different test because, you came in 2 years later than the rest of them. So that cumulative impact is a tough one. And I think, we can look at things like separation distances and how we're buffering these uses. But in terms of the impact on our roads, if we're only ever seeing from an on-farm industry, this business is going to have 2 trucks a day, it's tough to say that, you got to rebuild a road for 2 trucks, but suddenly if we have, 20 farms on that road that all have 2 trucks a day, well, that's quite a bit different. So we would definitely encourage working with our member municipalities to look at development charges for some of those more on-farm industrial uses. So you're not going to need them necessarily for the businesses like the corn maze or the pick your own or that sort of thing. But maybe if you are putting in a 500 square meter industrial shop, that's where your industrial development charge fees can apply on a per square meter basis. And the municipality is recouping some of that money that then they can then invest back into their roads and infrastructure in that regard. So I apologize, that's a bit of a rambling answer, but again, I really want to thank the committee for their feedback, and certainly if there's any other questions or feedback, love to hear it.
Thank you, Scott. Please stick around. Lori, you have your hand up. Please go ahead.
I just wanted to respond to a couple things that Scott had said, and thank you for your clarification, Scott. You had a rambling response to my rambling notes, so that's fine. Just wanted to, something that I noticed earlier, when you had that large farm example, you called it a fabrication plant. And I just think that that's a interesting definition. I don't think we would have called the local welding shop or the auto repair, the tractor repair place, a plant. And so I think that says right there what we're dealing with. So that's interesting. Also, I believe that other counties, maybe this is outdated and I'm not a planner, I'm just reading through stuff. So I think other counties like Brantford, Halton have omitted some uses from their official plans, and they stipulate that the use needs to support ag or benefit local farm operations. So maybe it can be done. I realize it might be a nightmare from paperwork, but it perhaps is already being done in some areas. In terms of the site plan controls, I don't know how the various tiers work. Can the county enforce the municipalities to ensure that site plan controls are in place? Because I'm not sure that they are at the moment on some of these, but again, I'm not a planner. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. Well, maybe we'll ask Deputy Warden McQueen first. He has had his hand up a bit, and then maybe Scott would like to reply to Lori's question. Go ahead, Deputy Warden.
Mr. Chair, I can wait. I had a bit of an overview, and I was thinking of moving a motion with regards to the information that Lori brought forward. So I can hold off, and Lori's having dialogue here with the planner, so I can hold off till after the discussion part is over, and then I might be putting a motion on the floor.
Okay, thank you. Scott, did you want to answer Lori's question or?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll keep this brief. With respect to site plan control is 100% a municipal responsibility. So each municipality would have their own site plan bylaw. And typically in a site plan bylaw, you would set categories of uses that need to apply to site plan control. So for example, most municipal bylaws would say you never need site plan if you're building a single house. You know, there's really not that much we can do with respect to a single house. But most site plan bylaws would say any new industrial use, or some would say any new industrial use beyond a certain size, or any new commercial use beyond a certain size would require site plan control. And so the county certainly encourages it, but it is 100% the responsibility of the municipalities. Some of the research we've seen on farm diversified uses with respect to site plan control suggests that maybe municipalities want to have a stratified site plan process. And I certainly want to thank some of the research team from the University of Guelph, which included Emily, who's on our call today, luckily, for some of these recommendations, because, you know, there's the thought that if you are looking at a on-farm business, whether it be a shop or another type of on-farm business, you know, maybe you don't need the full grading and engineered drainage plans and everything else that you would if you're putting a new Honda plant in an industrial park kind of thing. So some municipalities that I'm aware of would have different tests to say that, you know, there's kind of a simplified site plan process if you're doing something that's, you know, maybe on a farm, and then there's the put you through the hoops kind of site plan if you're doing something in an industrial park. And so with respect to Lori's other comment about other counties or jurisdictions. Yep, there is the ability for municipalities to include some on-farm diversified uses, but not others. The one thing we have to consider when we're looking at any planning decision is what would be the rationale for doing so. So if we're sort of hand selecting some uses from this list and not others, could we defend that if we were challenged in that regard? And obviously, it's not staff that makes decisions; it's council that make decisions, but council through staff need to know that they could defend that. And so, as I said in my presentation, municipalities have the ability to be more restrictive than the county in that regard. So they could be more restrictive in terms of the total size of the uses, or in some cases, if they saw fit and if they could justify it, they could be more restrictive in the scope of the on-farm diversified uses. So maybe they say, we want to allow for A, B, and C, but we don't like D and E. And so they could choose to omit that. We did have a question come up a number of years ago from one of our member municipalities to the province to say, can we completely ban on-farm diversified uses? Can we just say no to all this? And the province said, no, you can't do that. So you can come up with reasonable restrictions on size and types of uses, but we're not considering a ban at this time, which I think is fair. You know, I think it gives room for some municipal autonomy, but also allows for that broader provincial direction to sort of permeate across rural Ontario.
Thank you, Scott. Before we return to Deputy Warden McQueen, I have one quick question for Emily, since you're here. This is probably not unique just to Grey County. In your opinion, have other municipalities dealt with it in different ways, or do you have any input to this committee on how it could be dealt with?
Yeah, thank you for your question, Mr. Chair. In terms of my experience, so I'm dealing with municipal review of policies for on-farm diversified uses across 51 different county federations across Ontario. So I do have quite a bit of understanding in terms of what other municipalities are dealing with. I will be honest and say that the concerns regarding home industries are unique to Grey. I know Waterloo has had some concerns about home industries before, but this has been dealt with and permitted essentially, because the idea here, especially in terms of, you know, ensuring agricultural viability, is a few things. So we don't want to restrict the scope of on-farm diversified uses for one particular type of farmer or service that may have impacts for other types of industry. So the example is, you know, a distillery or a cidery or a brewery could easily be classified as an industrial use as well. So there are considerations to be thought of there, as well as I would also like to note that I think the most contentious type of on-farm diversified use that could easily be considered to have just as many impacts as a home industry would be agritourism uses. We have seen a significant amount of servicing impacts, traffic and whatnot that have come from these very large scale agritourism uses, what can be much more difficult to regulate than in home industry. So I just want to caution the group of kind of putting all of these yes, they need to be treated differently. However, I would like to note that these impacts certainly do occur across other buckets of on-farm diversified uses. My other comment is, I understand this is a very fine line we are walking here in terms of farmland preservation, agricultural compatibility, as well as allowing those permissions for farmers to have economic opportunity so that they can stay farming. From OFA's perspective, what would need to occur essentially is to balance all of those, of course, but also to design this policy in a way that it is green tape versus red tape, and that you are actually allowing farmers to have these opportunities in the first place, rather than, you know, OFA would not support limiting smaller farm operations from being excluded from having these opportunities. We would treat all farm operations as the same essentially in terms of being afforded these opportunities within municipal policy, as well as to make sure that the policies in place and the costs and the times associated with that. So going back to site plan, it can be done well, and it can also be designed in a way that it just hinders farmers from taking on these opportunities in the first place. If the cost and the time to get your permissions for an on-farm diversified use are just not worth it for a farmer, then they're not going to diversify in the first place, which is really the whole point, is to be able to you know, provide them with that opportunity so that they can remain viable and reinvest and keep those profits so that they can continue farming. The last comment I would like to make too is regarding secondary to the principal agricultural use. I know that this has been a common theme, and having it detract from the agricultural area. We have heard from municipalities as well as farmers where there are a number of benefits that have come from on-farm diversified uses, including home industries. For instance, diversification of your tax base. I know that is something that many municipalities I've dealt with have very keen to jump on and take advantage of that, as well as providing services, jobs, and everything for the local community. So I know I'm rambling on a bit, but I just wanted to reiterate some of those comments, specifically from OFA's perspective, that we support a broad range of on-farm diversified uses as it is permitted under provincial policy, but it is incredibly difficult for municipalities to design their policies in a way that walk that fine line and meet that balance of interest. So thank you for the opportunity to speak, Mr. Chair.
Quick question, and we'll move on to Kathy. Does the publication 851, is it complete as it is, or will it, in your opinion, need review going forward as far as dealing with OFDUs?
Thank you. Yeah, it is complete. It is a standalone document that the province has provided. I know through my previous work in working with OMAFRA and the University of Guelph on this to evaluate the guidelines and how municipalities are utilizing these guidelines across the province. There have been identified as some training opportunities that need to be done. It's not that the guidelines need to be changed or that it needs to be built upon. It is the interpretation by municipal planning staff and councillors and farmers as well in terms of the specific criteria and how to actually meet those tests of an on-farm diversified use to be consistent with provincial policy. So for instance, how do you, number one, the first criteria is that it's located on a farm. Well, farm is not defined in provincial policy. So how can municipalities actually design processes to meet that? Because what we are seeing is, for instance, something that we struggle with at OFA are rural landowners who are not farmers purchasing an on-farm diversified use for the benefit of the tax benefit, locating a business there rather than putting it into an industrial park or in the downtown, and then renting the land out to a farmer. So farmers aren't getting to benefit from those development permissions that are allowed on farm diversified use parcels. So in terms of training and work that needs to be done, I think hopefully OMAFRA and would be working with municipalities to get that information out there. I know the University of Guelph will be hosting some training sessions as well. But in terms of the standalone document, publication 851, my understanding is that it's complete as it is.
Thank you. Kathy, please go ahead.
And that was exactly my question for Emily, is how these diversified uses on a tax level, is that taxed as farm income, or is it, and are the buildings taxed as farm buildings, even when there's an industrial intent? Because roughly 20 years ago, if let's say you had 100 acres and you had 50 cows, but you worked for Ontario Hydro and your income from Ontario Hydro was more than what the farm income was, you're then penalized by the amount of farm, the write-offs that you can use on the farm. So now we're saying that this has to be secondary to the farm, but some of these industrial shops are generating very large incomes, and is that a farm income? End of question.
Yes, if I may respond to the question. So no, quite simply, it would not qualify as farm income. That is defined very specifically at the federal level in terms of what activities actually qualify as farm income and also to have you secure your FBR. In terms of the tax classification, so I am not the tax guru at OFA, I will be very clear about that, but my experience in talking with members about their on-farm diversified uses is as soon as that building permit is issued, they see a reclassification of their buildings that have been used for the on-farm diversified use. The parcels that are used for the on-farm diversified use no longer qualify for the 25% of the agricultural rate. You will see it be classified most commonly to commercial or industrial tax rates, which for the farmer can be quite a significant change. Of course, it's one of the highest tax rates there are. For the municipality, it is potentially significant source of additional revenue to your tax base. But just to clarify that those on-farm diversified uses, I'd say 9 times out of 10, if the building permit is issued, will be classified as something else, depending on the use.
Thank you, Emily. Scott, go ahead.
Yeah, just to build on what Emily's saying, she got it bang on as far as I'm aware. I'm not a tax expert either, but a couple of years ago, we had our director of finance look into this further, and he pulled up examples of farms, and so you can have multiple tax classes on a single farm from a property tax perspective. And so, you know, the farmland is taxed at the farmland rate, the house would be taxed at a residential rate, and then the on-farm business would be taxed at, as Emily said, a commercial or industrial rate. Because I know we had been hearing questions from the public, you know, along the lines of, you know, are people putting these industries on a farm as a tax dodge, if you will, and simply put, no, because they're being taxed at the same rate they would be if they were in an industrial park.
Thank you, Scott. Did I see you had your hand up, Brandon, before we get you to Warren?
Just a quick note on the income tax side. Yeah, if you work for Ontario Hydro, make a lot of money, and farming is not your primary income, then the percentage of losses you can carry to decrease your other income is less than 100%. But it's not, I mean, that's been around a really long time, I think more than 20 years. So I don't think that has changed much. So it's really more of the primary. You can only carry losses or use losses against other income if it's actually your majority income, but the CRA will come after you when they notice you're carrying losses for a very long time. So you need to be a viable farm to keep your farm number.
Thank you, Brenda. Warden Hicks, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is to Scott. Scott, in your presentation, you mentioned that in 2014, the province relaxed the rules. I'm wondering if you can give us more information about that. Why were the rules relaxed, and in what way? And what was the impact of that relaxation?
Sure. Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your question, Mr. Warden. So the province's primary policy setting document is called the Provincial Policy Statement. And so there was a Provincial Policy Statement in 1997, there was one in 2005, and there was one in 2014. And, oh, sorry.
Bye.
Okay, sorry about that. So there was one in 2014, and you know, I certainly can't speak for the province, but in the 2005 version, which was the operative version from 2005 until 2014, the province allowed for agricultural uses similar to what they do now. They allowed for agricultural related uses, again, very similar to what they do now, and they allowed for what was called secondary uses at the time. And secondary uses were sort of the precursor to on-farm diversified uses. But simply put, there wasn't a ton of guidance given. We didn't have a nice implementation guideline similar to the publication 851. And so it was a lot more working with local AMAFRA staff and municipalities trying to sort it out sort of on their own. And that's not in any way a slight to provincial staff. They were great to deal with and always very supportive when we had questions. But that's where we had municipalities like Grey County trying to push policies to say that the on-farm diversified use, or what was called the secondary use at the time, had to directly relate to the farm operation. So we had that example where the welding shop had to be, you know, welding gates or fixing farm equipment or watering troughs or whatever else, versus, you know, manufacturing widgets, if you will. And so in 2014, they broadened the definition of what was then secondary uses and now on-farm diversified uses to allow for a greater class of a greater suite of uses. And after that, you know, of course, there was a bunch of questions back to provincial staff every time we'd have a farmer knocking on the door saying, hey, I want to do this. And we'd go back to the province to say, does this fit? Is this what you meant? And I think the province maybe finally got fed up of dealing with people like me. And in 2016, luckily, they issued the publication 851 to really spell it out and to really get into the details of this is what we mean. This is the type of use you can consider as an on-farm diversified use by citing very specific examples and also also citing very specific examples of how you control the size. So for those that are maybe a little bit longer in the tooth on this committee, prior to sort of that 2014, or prior to some of the more recent changes, it used to be that the county had very limiting policies in terms of size on farm diversified uses, and especially the building size was very small, but you would get a little bit more outdoor storage size. What the county was hearing from farmers was, that works in principle, but with the cost of some of the equipment and materials they're dealing with, they really didn't want to store it outside. And so if anything, some of the farmers said, we'd rather trade you. Could we have bigger buildings and less outdoor storage? And so in 2012, the county updated our policies. And then in 2019, we updated our policies again to apply to reflect both the 2014 changes and also that 2016 guideline. So, a long-winded way of saying to your question, Mr. Warden, through the 2014 policies and the subsequent guideline, it did allow for an increase in total size and a greater suite or range of uses permitted as on-farm diversified uses. But it also came with the benefit of having much clearer guidance from the province, such that planners like myself could better interpret those policies.
Thank you, Scott. Any more questions, comments, suggestions at this time before we return the floor to Deputy Warden McQueen? Please go ahead, Randy.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for everyone for their comments today, their presentation, and for allowing us to organize this committee meeting just to hear some of the feedback and comments from this committee as well as from the egg community. We really, truly appreciate that. As I've been listening through some of these comments, I think there's for sure an opportunity, and Scott mentioned this, that the county official plan obviously sets out, here's the broad policy framework. Then local municipalities can be more restrictive if they're experiencing certain challenges with respect to OFDUs. And I see there might be an opportunity then to, and one thing that Scott mentioned is that the ability through site plan control, and I think Emily also highlighted this, is an opportunity then to try to ensure that any of those potential impacts that we've heard about today in some of the comments can be mitigated to the best extent possible. So I think there's an opportunity to work with the local municipalities, the agriculture community, maybe University of Guelph again, because they've been fantastic to work with in the past on previous studies and recommendations, to look at maybe some best practices or some guidelines about that site plan application process. Given that there's a wide variety of OFDUs, and I think Brenda mentioned this in her comments in terms of, is there a difference between some OFDUs and some others, right? On more the industrial side, is there more potential for impacts from that wide variety of OFDUs? And then through that, that guideline or best practices, developing things like complete application requirements for site plan process. That way it's being straight upfront. Here's maybe some of the requirements that are associated with certain types of OFD uses, so that farmers clearly understand what that process looks like. If they're proposing, say, an industrial shop on their property or a corn maze on their property, what does that look like in terms of process? And trying to make it as straightforward and simple as process, but making sure that all those comments that we're hearing today and from the agriculture community are addressed through that process. So I just want to raise that I see that as a potential opportunity. Depending on what the outcome is of OP11 and what County Council's ultimate decision is, I see that as an opportunity to work with the agriculture community and with local municipalities on how we can try to address some of those comments through that site plan process. Thanks for that.
Thank you, Randy. Deputy Warden McQueen, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just before I consider putting a motion on the floor, a couple points of clarity was the discussion. Site plan control, Randy, I understand that that's changing, that will have no longer, I guess we maybe don't approve that as a body. I know at Grey Highlands, we approve our site plan control, but that's changing now that that will be no longer approved by a municipal body. Is that true?
Yeah, through some legislation changes that the site plan approval will be rests with delegated to staff. So it'd be local municipal staff. That doesn't, though, prevent municipality to identify what are those then complete application requirements and what are the criteria and things that are assessed through that site plan process. That to me is still open territory, open game, I guess, in terms of what that process looks like. But you're correct in that the changes to provincial legislation are to delegate those approvals to staff. And again, I think that's more in terms of you're getting into more of a technical exercise when you're dealing with a site plan process. So dealing with those technical matters and outlining what those technical criteria are, I think that's where the opportunity could lie. And then that way, some of those matters and comments that we've heard today and through other comments can be addressed through that process. And staff, no doubt, would be approving those approvals, but would be looking at through the lens of the criteria and through those technical requirements.
Thank you for that, Randy. And through, if I may continue, Mr. Chair. So going back to Lori's presentation, and I know that I want to thank Lori for bringing the 3-page of comments back. And I'm looking at maybe moving a motion, Mr. Chair, that we receive that 3-page letter. I know that it was mentioned that the county council is meeting for the last time next week, and I think part of that deferral on the last county council meeting was to get more information, and I feel it's probably very prudent that 3-page letter be attached to the minutes of this meeting. For only reason being is it sort of brings information from a number of agricultural sectors, but it's also coming through our agriculture ag office that the Grey County does sort of recognize as a sort of a go-to source for those comments. So I feel it's very important to attach Lori's 3-page letter in print form to these minutes. I would think probably these minutes will be circulated up through to the next county council meeting next week. I know it's probably getting close to the deadline, but I think for the record, I think it is important. I think what was read there was sort of a really strong reflection of what has been made by a number of concerns. And I would move that motion, Mr. Chair, that those comments are attached to the minutes of today's meeting.
All right, I'd like to have,
Through you, Mr. Chair, I do apologize. Just before we move forward to consider Mr. Councillor McQueen's motion, we do have a motion on the floor.
Right. That's true enough.
So if I might suggest through you, Mr. Chair, if there is no further discussion from the delegation or staff's presentation, the committee might consider the motion to receive the report for information. And I would not have any comments necessarily to Councillor McQueen's motion, except to clarify that a summary of the concerns and comments raised today will be captured in the minutes, in addition to any decision that the committee might render about attaching the letter discussed today, just to reassure folks that the comments have been fulsomely captured.
all right, thank you, Sarah. So can we have the motion first on the comments that were discussed during this meeting, that they will be captured? Over in the seconder, please.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. If we could first call the question to receive the report for information. I have it moved by Warden Hicks and seconded by Lori Smith that the report regarding the status of official plan amendment number 11 be received for information. And so once you're prepared, Mr. Chair, if you wouldn't mind calling the question for me.
Call the question.
All those in favor? Seeing many hands, any opposed? Seeing none. And now, Mr. Chair, I will leave you to proceed with the Councillor McQueen's motion.
Let's go ahead with the motion from Councillor McQueen. All in favor of the motion?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, just before
Sorry.
you call the vote, just further to Sarah's comments, I just wanted to bring to the committee's attention that the Agriculture Advisory Committee does report to Committee of the Whole. And so these minutes will be on the Committee of the Whole agenda. This is kind of a process aside from just how we do our council meetings. So OPA 11 will be considered again by County Council first, and then these minutes and any comments captured in the minutes will be discussed at Committee of the Whole, which follows County Council. So I think Scott, I see he has his hands up. Perhaps he could, during his presentation of OPA 11 on October 13th, will incorporate the comments from this committee into that presentation, but I'll maybe let him confirm that. Sorry.
Please go ahead, Scott.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, thank you, Tara, for raising that. I'd be happy to provide council with a summary. And the other neat thing about our digital age is council can watch this video anytime after the meeting. The only other thing I was going to suggest, just to build off Deputy Warden McQueen's motion and the comments received from Lori. Lori, if it's something you feel comfortable with, I would encourage you to reach back out to those individuals that shared comments with you and have them send in their comments directly to the county. Just a quick email or anything else will do. The only reason I say this is because the Planning Act is very particular, as legislation should be, on how and when we receive comments. And so there's a difference between person X sending the county an email versus person Y giving us a verbal summary of person X's comments. So for the purposes of our record and making sure that we have all those comments, if you feel comfortable, Lori, either forwarding us those comments or encouraging those individuals to forward those comments directly, that would be most helpful at the county level. And then as Tara has mentioned, I would be happy to summarize some of the discussions here today in my presentation to County Council on October the 13th.
All right, thank you, Scott. Deputy Warden McQueen, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess the point of my putting this motion on the floor is sort of unique because it's unique in a way that Lori, who represents the Ag office in Grey County, I think it's reflective of a collection of comments that she has received. And certainly I don't disagree with what Mr. Taylor is saying about individuals forwarding their individual comments. But I feel this is unique because part of the reason at the last County Council, it was deferred to get feedback. And also we've used the agricultural office for a lot of other circumstances going through our official plan a few years back. So I would like to stick to my motion in the sense that the letter that was read off does be added to these minutes, because I think it's sort of reflective of the reason why there is such a discussion on that particular part of the OPA 11. And so, and I think also because of it being County Council's last meeting of this term, I think that that information is critical and prudent to be attached to these minutes for the review and preview of County Council coming up next week. So I'd like to stick to that. I know it's not a normal practice, but I'm putting that motion on the floor that these to be attached to those minutes as what was read out. I'm sure Lori can provide that in written form, and I look for a seconder for that, Mr. Chair.
Do we have a seconder at this time? I see Kathy had her hands up first, so Kathy, you will be seconded. Can we have a vote at this time as well then? Vote for. Would you like the vote recorded, Deputy Warden McQueen?
I don't think we can do a recorded vote.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, but certainly show of hands is certainly, yeah.
Vote against? No votes against. Motion carried. Thank you. I think we're done with this particular topic. Deputy Warden, go ahead.
Comment that was raised. I think it's an interesting comment about income and off-farm income versus your primary income coming from your agricultural part versus income coming from another source that's more than the farm, and how that is viewed upon through CRA. A brief 2 points. I know a number of years back, probably like 40 years ago, a particular doctor farmed, and he tried to claim that his income as a doctor went against the expenses of his farm, and then CRA rules that no, you can't do that. Your primary income is being a doctor, not a farmer. With saying that, I just find it interesting though, if your off-farm diversity use is non-agriculture related, and say your farm income is X and your off-farm income is Y, and say it's more than the on-farm income, does that FDU still be considered as farm income? And I think that's a real critical point, because that could be a real an advantage of that particular reason of having the off-farm use, in the sense that it's a different classing, and it's considered. And I'm just sort of seeking that, and maybe nobody here has that answer, but I think it is interesting to note, because I will say that I know from a provincial perspective, it's looking at preserving the farms and the farmlands, but there is something to be said about preserving a farmer and allowing that farmer to continue through his career as a viable farmer. So maybe nobody can answer that. I see there's a hand up, but I'm just curious, is that a difference in the sense of that being through the tax implications of CRA? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Brenda, please go ahead.
Okay, so I mean, I've worked in accounting offices doing income tax, and I'm not an accountant, but in general, if you have different income for different businesses, you can't just hide it all in your farm. I'm not saying no one hides it under farm income, because I'm sure that exists, but CRA doesn't like that. And if they figure it out, you're in trouble. So really, if you are making money that is not specifically that list of farm things, they will notice. So you're not supposed to be claiming, like if you do a full machine shop, that should actually be probably a separate business or a separate line. Like if you look under like business income, there's farming, there's fishing, there's whatever, and there's other, right? So they should be different lines. Like even if you are a consultant doing other things, but it's not actually selling your farm products, you're supposed to be claiming that on a separate line. They do all speak to each other. Like, yes, your losses for your sort of business income will sort of subtract off other things, but if the farming is not your primary, you will not be able to claim 100% of those losses against your other income. And I'm not saying nobody hides things, because they do. So it depends on your accountant, and it depends on how much risk you want to take with CRA.
All right, thank you, Brenda. Amy, you have a comment as well, or a question? Go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick one, because I feel the conversation has centered around this sort of need to allow farmers to have a diversified income, which of course is incredibly important, but particularly for folks who have small scale operations on these potentially smaller parcels under 20 hectares. I just wanted to make the point that it is absolutely possible to generate your full income from a small scale parcel, and they're not necessarily small scale in terms of revenues. Like a market garden, for example, could generate $40,000, $50,000 an acre, absolutely providing a decent income for a full family. I think our farms and other farms in our county are certainly examples of that. So there shouldn't be necessarily a pressure to develop these ODFUs on those smaller scale parcels as a means of making farms viable. I think that there's absolutely opportunity to have viable farms on smaller parcels without the development that's occurring. So I just wanted to put that out there. there are examples of farms in our area who are able to do it without developing and not compromising those small scale parcels that are potentially the only affordable parcels for new farmers and young farmers entering the industry in the future.
Thank you, Amy. And since this entire discussion seems to be around the preservation of agricultural land, since it is quite a limited commodity, my question to members of council and the warden as well is that since we have this desire to have opportunity for industrial processes within our county, why is there not more land set aside for industrial parks? Maybe there needs to be a need going forward that we are in relative most communities are in relative close proximity to these agricultural expansions. Are there any plans to provide some industrial lands to allow for some of these expansions? Scott, maybe you'd like to discuss that.
Yeah, certainly. I won't speak on behalf of council or any individual councillors, but I will say from a county staff perspective, that's actually something we're working on right now. And we're working very closely with staff in our economic development department, Steve Furness and Savannah Myers, and looking on a municipality by municipality basis, what land do we have available for industrial purposes right now? And of that land that's available, what is truly shovel ready, as they say? So if we have 5 acres of land and somebody says, well, it's shovel ready, but we still need servicing and we still need to build a road, well, then you're kind of not shovel ready at that stage. Versus if you have the pipes running right by the door and all you need to do is get your building permit and hook up, then you're shovel ready. So one of the things that we're trying to work with our member municipalities on is who has what, and depending on what each municipality has, what are your needs going forward? And we have some that are actively, some municipalities that are very proactive in expanding their business parks and looking at those lands for the future. And we have others that maybe have just been working on other priorities, so they haven't been focusing on that. But certainly from a planning and economic development perspective, we see that as a huge priority. And that growth management strategy that I talked about, that was the original sort of impetus for Official Plan Amendment number 11, did look at those employment projections for the next 25 years. And it broke it down into 3 different types of employment. One would be more of your standard kind of industrial park employment. The second would be sort of your more people-related services. So if your community is growing, are you going to need more teachers, more doctors, more, various other things? And then the third would be, what does your rural employment look like? So what does the farm employment look like in that regard? And so we want to make sure that we're serving all those markets, not just focusing on the FDUs, but that we have the land in our settlement areas for those industrial expansions, but also for those other types of people services in that regard.
Thank you, Scott. Councillor Kivany.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your question. And I just wanted to share in relation to where we are in Meaford. We have 2 parcels just across the road, essentially from each other. One is 20 acres and another one is 35 acres that could be available for industrial growth. And those are both on County Road, Gray Road 7, which is going to have some reconstruction done next year in 2023. And at that point in time, our municipality will be responsible for putting in new servicing. So with that project complete, then those 2 parcels would be almost shovel ready. The services would just have to come from Gray Road 7 then into the land. So we are very close in Meaford to having those 2 parcels ready to go.
All right, thank you, Councillor. Any more questions, comments, suggestions as far as the official plan amendments? Go ahead, Lori.
I guess I would ask, so if these industrial parks are created, so certainly Meaford is establishing them by the sounds of things, which is wonderful. How do we decide, or can we decide, if certain of the more industrial in nature plants that are on agricultural lands, do they go to the industrial park? how's that decision made? Or are they safe when they're on an agricultural property and they appear to be farming? Thank you.
Scott, please go ahead.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for that question, Lori. There's sort of two answers. The first answer would be anybody that already has their permissions, whether they've built or not, if they have their zoning permissions, then those are in place. And so they could continue to use those buildings and those lands as they see fit. With respect to going forward, sort of there's two main answers on what would determine whether or not it's an on-farm business or whether or not it would go in an industrial park. And so the two criteria there primarily would be size and service levels. And so we have those sizes set out. And so, you know, if we got a new industrial use that needs 400,000 square feet, then definitely you know, an industrial park use, non-farm use. Or similarly, if we have a new industrial use that's using high amounts of water or needs high amounts of wastewater treatment, then those are the type of uses that we're not going to put on a private well and septic system. There would be some other criteria that gets factored in too in terms of noise and emissions, but the two sort of big ticket items would be the size of the use proposed and the servicing. And I guess I should include there in the servicing too, also the traffic impacts. So if we're dealing with, again, a major use that has lots of trucks in and out per day, then it certainly might not be appropriate on a rural gravel road. It might need to be something on a county road or even a provincial highway, depending on the scale of the use in that regard.
All right, thank you. Lori.
Just one further question. I'm sorry for keep asking questions. So I know there'll be checks and balances as the on-farm diversified unit or use is applied for, but is there any auditing or just monitoring as they get rolling and down the road to ensure that, you know, what they originally said they were going to be manufacturing is being manufactured and that it continues to ensure that there's no pollution, that the noise concerns, there aren't any noise concerns, et cetera? Is there ongoing monitoring that can be established during this process?
Thank you, Lori. Scott, would you like to?
Yeah, again, through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Lori, for all these questions and all this feedback. Super appreciated. With respect to ongoing monitoring, there's a couple different types. One is there is bylaw control. So that would be done by your municipal bylaw enforcement officers, and they would look at things like, you know, if you were limited in size to X use, you know, are you maintaining that, or have you crept up and tried to build more, or, you know, are you meeting the parking requirements and everything else? With respect to other emissions, depending on the type of emissions, some emissions are under provincial jurisdiction in that regard. So, you know, this is a poor example, but your bylaw enforcement officer, for example, isn't necessarily looking at testing what's coming out of a smokestack or something else. We're not building smokestacks per se, but just an example. So in some cases, we'd be dealing with other ministries in that regard. With respect to other ongoing monitoring elements, one suggestion that came to us as part of this process was that municipalities might choose to initiate a business licensing procedure throughout their municipality. And so this wouldn't just apply to on-farm diversified uses, this would apply to all businesses. So a business in your downtown, a business in your industrial park, and you would get your initial license, and then you could have the need for renewal periods. The county hasn't enshrined this in our county official plan because it would impose significant operational requirements on our member municipalities. We have one or two right now that currently have business licenses. I believe the city of Owen Sound does, but most of our 9 municipalities don't. And so it does take a significant amount of staff resources to operate that and to renew those licenses and to follow up. But the one individual that had initially requested some of these changes to the on-farm diversified uses noted that there is one municipality in Waterloo region that does this, and they take that requirement for a farm business registration, not only at the time you apply for your on-farm diversified use, but at every single time you go back to renew your business license. And so that is one option that municipalities would have available for them. But as a county staff, we didn't feel comfortable in recommending that across the board, just based on the impacts it would have on municipal staffing operations and budgets in that regard.
All right, thank you, Scott. Any more questions, comments at this time on our current topic? Deputy Warden McQueen, go ahead.
Just briefly, and I was just, as people were talking, I quickly went to the MLS website just to look at farm prices in Grey County, and they range quite a spectrum of range from 1.1 to $3 million for a farm. I didn't get into the details, but certainly the price of farms have certainly increased along with everything else. And I guess we have to take things in perspective of people wanting to start farming and buy a farm. It is a huge capital outlay, and that's just the land and the buildings, if that's and then that's not including whatever type of farming you're doing too. So just in general, farming is a huge capital outlay in today's day, and I think that's also needs to be just put in mind of, it's not an easy business to start off, that's for sure. And we do need to look at promote ways of supporting not only the agricultural lands, but supporting the farmer, and some people might say that the farmer may be an endangered species just because of the capital outlay that's there. And so it's not an easy career to get into, but it is rewarding. I've been a farmer all my life, and it is rewarding. And anyway, I just wanted to pass that comment on, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Please go ahead, Kathy.
Sorry, I'm on my iPad today, and it's just not as easy to do what I want to do. So in the past, a lot of industrial parks have subsidized to promote getting industry into the industrial parks. So I'm just going to throw this comment out there. As a young farmer, if you couldn't afford to buy a farm, and you bought a few acres in the industrial park, and your idea was to put up a very technical, very high-end, state-of-the-art poultry facility, and all manure would be going off-site, was stored indoors, is that a good fit? So I guess the opposite of that question is it a good fit to have these industrial manufacturing businesses in our rural landscape? That's it.
All right, thank you for our comments, and I think that's refers back to the guidelines permitted under publication 851. You know, is it appropriate as it stands? So again, thank you for your input there. All right, any more comments, questions, concerns at this time?
There is something in the chat, John.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I think there was a comment there from Joanne. Was that correct?
Yeah, sorry. I was just wondering if there is if there's an on-farm diversified use in a particular municipality, and there's a complaint to the municipality about that they don't think that they are following the guidelines that they that was approved in the first place. Is there anything that can happen? Is there anything that the municipality can do about that? Or I think it's a question for Scott.
Go ahead, Scott. Please respond.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the question, Joanne. So yeah, there is a process. The first point of contact would likely be contacting bylaw enforcement at the municipality, and you know, those contacts are usually very well or easily findable on the municipal website, and then bylaw enforcement could look at it from a zoning perspective. Is it meeting the rules in that regard? If there was a site plan in place, they would ensure that it is or isn't meeting the requirements of the site plan. So if you said you were going to, you know, build a fence and buffer the use with trees and everything else, they would ensure that that's there. If it is more of an emissions thing, it might be a complaint to a different body. So as I said, it might end up going to the ministry in that regard. But I think the first point of contact for any member of the public that has a general concern would be to be reaching out to municipal bylaw enforcement. And if it's not something under their purview, then they can help direct to the appropriate body in that regard.
Thank you, Scott.
All right, thank you. Any more comments, suggestions, inputs? All right. I think we can move on from our discussion on the status of the official plan amendments, number 11. Next item on the agenda, I believe correspondence. Was there any correspondence to be received at this time?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, there is no correspondence
There's
listed
not?
on today's agenda.
Okay. We'll move on to our next item, roundtable challenges, updates, and or opportunities from the different representatives. Anything going on out there? No comments, suggestions. All I've got that we're from the ag biz side. We're busy planning for the 2023 cropping season. And I hate to say it, inputs costs have not changed a tremendous amount. So again, if we are talking to producers, planning ahead again is name of the game. And, you know, hopefully we're looking at some reduced input costs for most of our producers within the county. But other than that, not a lot of changes from this year going forward. Kathy, please go ahead.
Just going to mention the ongoing pressure from avian influenza, and anybody in the Owen Sound area is, I'm sure, heard the news of what's going on at the park. I think we need to really look at how events are held, fairs, all those kinds of things. That has to be like anybody that has that kind of input. We really need to look at the gathering of poultry, and because this is impactful hugely. Thanks.
Yeah, and to add to that, I know we deal with a lot of the small flock producers in our area, people that want to, you know, have a few chickens for egg production or raise some meat birds, and it really affects them as well. And they're not always aware of all the implications that surround the influenza. So it's a good point, Kathy. Lori, please go ahead.
I was going to try and not speak anymore, but I have to tell you about what's going on at Grey Ag. So we are working on our winter courses right now. If you have any ideas of anything that you would like us to offer between the end of January and end of March, please let us know. We have some cool ideas happening, but I will take more. We're hoping for 20 courses, and we just received an amazing, so we received some amazing funding from the Trillium Fund, from Trillium Mutual Insurance, their Roots Fund, that gave us some dollars to be able to buy some more equipment so that we can truly offer some hybrid courses. Last year, we had people coming from out west to watch us in our webinars. So we've really expanded our group that wants to participate. So now we are going to actually have a video camera and the whole professional deal so that we can offer these hybrid events at Grey Ag appropriately. So a huge thank you to Trillium's Roots Foundation for allowing us to do that. So some courses will be offered just as webinars, some will be offered as hybrid, some will be offered just in person. It'll change based on the audience we're trying to reach as well. And there's also a maple syrup course coming up on November 26th. I've wanted to do maple syrup for a long time, but the producers keep telling me we can't do it between the end of January and end of March. We're too busy. So we are doing it on November 26th. So if you know of anyone that is wanting to get into maple syrup or just starting out, we have the representative from OMAFRA as well as 2 producers that will tell us all their tips and tricks. So we're looking forward to that. Also, Grey Bruce Farmers Week will be a hybrid event again. We're going back to in-person in Elmwood on Community Center, as well as live streaming like we did in 18, 19, and 20 with CTRE Productions. And it will be from January 4th to January 10th, starting with beef day, then dairy, then goat, then sheep, then horse, then ecological, then crops, and then a big break, hopefully, or at least a couple days off. So that's what we're looking forward to. And if you need any information, please go to our websites, Grey Ag Services or Grey Bruce Farmers Week. Give me a call or email me. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. Brenda?
I just want to reassure Kathy that I think that the Ontario vet, the official vet for Ontario, has sent out like notices all about having the spring non-movement of whatever birds. So I think I think even the small flock farmers, they definitely do watch this sort of thing. So I know for NFU that information was sent out to its membership as well. And I've heard it from a lot of different places. So it's getting out there. And maybe on a very controversial note, I just wanted to share a link in the chat. There's definitely, as, hold on, let me put that in first. As John was saying, input prices are up. Just want to make a note, there's definitely a lot of rhetoric that's politicizing this whole nitrogen emissions sort of thing. So not to get into it because that could be a very long thing, but you know, the NFU has written a document just talking about sort of everything surrounding the nitrogen emissions and the government targets. And you know, I know that when I read articles and like the various farm articles, they definitely say things like it's an emissions target. It's not saying that it's like a decrease in the amount of nitrogen used. There's no actual number set for that. So, but I do also know that there is a lot of rhetoric out there about farmers being, I guess, forced to do a bunch of things that they don't want to do by government or whatnot. So anyway, just want to put this out there as a document that really does lay out a bunch of the different graphs to do with input costs, yields versus profit, which are not the same thing. Yield versus profit is not the same thing. And some of the information around that, just if anyone wants to have just a very fact-based document to sort of not have this become a politicized topic. So just want to put that out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Brenda. Deputy Warden McQueen, and then we'll go back to you, Kathy. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just following up on something that Grey County did a few years ago, Ag 0.40, and I think it was Ag 0.4 2 or 3 times, maybe. I'm not sure, but I just wonder back to staff, is that something in the new in the near and new future of Grey County that they're looking at bringing that back? I think it was quite beneficial to show what's happening in the agricultural side in Grey County and some of the advances in technology and different things. It was a good way to showcase what's going on in Grey County. And I just wonder if there's any thought on and continuing with that. I know COVID probably put a bit of a change to that, but I just through you, Mr. Chair, just curious if there's any future ideas around the Ag 4.0.3 or 4 or 5 or whatever it is.
Thank you, Deputy Warden. Do we have an answer on that one?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your comments, Deputy Warden McQueen. Yeah, it's been a great event in the past. That's always been Philly Markowitz's baby, and she's done very well at organizing those. I know it is a huge demand on her time, and I believe there was one last year in a virtual setting. I don't know if they're still planning on going every year or every other year, but I know we can certainly reach out to economic development staff, including Philly, and get you an answer on that and get your reply. Philly's tied up in another meeting today, but she specifically said to me, as soon as she gets done the other meeting, she's going to watch the video of the Ag Advisory Committee because it's one of her favorites, and we always as staff learn a lot from this. And I see Randy is unmuted, so he might have an update here as well.
Not a specific update other than we did hold the 4.0.4 earlier this year, March 30th. And like Scott said, we'll circle back with what are the plans for 2023 with respect to Ag 4.0. And I don't know if any dates have been solidified at this stage, but once those have been solidified, we'll definitely share with this committee and others.
Just to follow up on that, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
I guess I remember back of more the on farm, all like the tour that we used to do, where we used to go to to see the you know, to see it. I know there was a workshop, but you know, going out and seeing it is sort of believing it, and that's the part that I thought was so great, and certainly it's not impressing. It was a great first few years that was the full slate of that, and I just wanted to make sure that you heard that I made the comment, and others that it was well received, and certainly a great opportunity to showcase a lot of things. So, and thanks to Philly.
Perfect. Well, we'll look forward to the updates. Kathy, go ahead.
Hi, just to follow up on Brenda's comments about the small flocks. So I guess part of my comment is I'm seeing some rumblings in some municipalities for these in-town small flocks being allowed again. There was a local municipality that, so just out of interest, I do follow some groups that are doing quite a bit of trading, buying and selling of poultry, and it's hobbyists, and it's those kind of activities that put the commercial flocks in jeopardy, that movement. So as a municipality, or as a council and municipality and people that are in the industry, and we talked about that maybe a year and a half ago. I remember there was, I think the town of Hanover was looking at allowing small flocks within the town. So I think this just underlines that not allowing that was the right decision. And that's the end of my comment.
Thank you, Kathy. Any other discussion, roundtable discussion before we move on? Don't see anything. Other business we'd like to discuss at this time? I don't see any comments from the warden. I think we're getting at the almost at the end of our term, so maybe Warden Hicks, if you have any closing comments for this committee, we'd certainly like to hear them.
Certainly, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to thank everybody on this committee, because I got to tell you, I learned so much. There's so much that we don't know. So this advisory committee has been very, very useful in terms of educating and in terms of bringing forward that voice that I think is very necessary in Grey County. So to all of you, I just want to say thank you very much, and I hope you'll continue to contribute.
Thank you, Warden Hicks. Next meeting dates to be determined. Is there any more information at this time on that, Sarah? Nothing there. So as we come to the end of our meeting, I would mind motion to adjourn. Lori, did you have your hand up before?
Yes,
Yeah.
I try to. I was just wondering if we can be given some direction as to what happens after the election. I think I was told that a new committee would be struck when there is a new group of councillors. So if Sarah can maybe, or Tara can tell us what's the next steps, please.
Sure, I can provide a little further information. So yes, after the term of council ends, the memberships are considered dissolved because you were appointed for this term of council. And staff will be taking a further report to County Council in the upcoming weeks to look at our committee structure and what we have and what we recommend going forward. So you can stay tuned for what that will look like later this year.
Okay, thank you, Tara. All right, well, let's move on. Motion to adjourn. I've got a proof and a second there. Warden Hicks, and seconded by Amy. If that's okay, then we'll like to thank everybody at this time. Thank you for your input, and have a happy Thanksgiving.